You look fit.
I look fit. I'm not fit, but.
All right, I'll start this. I'm Ryan Brown, and this is the Unvarnished podcast, and I am in Brooklyn, New York today at the studio of Edward Minoff. What's your Instagram? It's
Edward Minoff.
Edward Minoff. Okay, so
But everybody calls me Ted.
Everybody calls you Ted. All right, and we met at the in 2007 at the Hudson River Fellowship, and I think at that time I was so starstruck by so many people. So coming in, I remember you and Travis and Jacob. Just the idea that I could be around you guys was such a thrill and an intimidating thrill.
Until it was a disappointment.
No, it wasn't. I remember halfway through that first, what was it, 4 weeks the first time? 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
Yes, I think it was 3.
Yeah. We would meet every once in a while at the barn. And I remember you gave me a compliment, and I lived on that thing for years. It was like, because, I was young. I didn't know what I was doing. I was clumsy with trying to figure things out. And Ted Minoff gave me a compliment, and I was like, oh shit, maybe I can do this.
And you've parlayed it into a career.
I think it was the same day we went to see Batman at the theater.
I didn't see it that time.
No, where he does the pencil, the you want to see a pencil disappear? Do you know you know what I'm talking about? The Dark Knight?
This is the, what's his name ones? The
Christian Bale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was on this high, and then I saw this crazy, awesome movie. It was just a great day. It was a great day. Yeah. So that's where we met. And then just kind of tried to keep in touch. I was there the next year as well, and you were there. So we got to know each other a little bit more over the
And you
years.
had already been at Florence.
Yeah,
at the Florence Academy, which I had been at, I think, a few years before you.
Yeah. Yeah, I went in 2003 for 6 months, and then ran out of money, and then went back in 2007, graduated in 2008. So you were there, was it earlier than 2003?
2000.
Oh my gosh, you were one of the OGs of the Florence Academy.
Not really. I mean, like all these things, they have so many iterations. So I was there after Charles Weed left, and Charles Weed was considered like an era of the Florence Academy that I had missed, and everybody was talking about. It's like Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
It was always better.
Yeah, everybody was still talking about Charles Weed when I got there. Yeah, he had a huge impact. And before I came here today, last night, I'm still on Utah time, so I took some NyQuil, and that always gives me weird dreams. So right before I got here, right before my alarm went off, I had this wild dream that I walked into your studio for this, had all my gear, and you had there's water all over the floor.
That makes sense.
You had created like this wave machine. You know the one. You know the wave thing in Texas.
Yeah, Kelly Slater.
Yeah. Where you can surf. You had a mini version of that, and you were doing all these like crazy sketches. And you're like, "Give me a minute. I gotta figure this out."
Oh, I wish I was that smart.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I walked in my dream, and I'm like, I gotta get more serious about painting, man.
I haven't had a wave dream too recently, but I used to have a lot of them where I would like just crack the code of like reflections on water and really like figure out how to represent it in a way, just break through in some way of like understanding, which is, what the past, whatever decade and a half has been for me in terms of like being out there on the beach and then coming back to the studio and trying to understand.
Well, you were studying, I remember you giving a lecture on the fluidity of water, the movement of water at the Hudson River School, and it was enlightening then. So this is not like, it's been more than a decade. I mean, you've been really like...
Yeah. Well, we were talking about earlier before we started recording, like teaching, and I think preparing that lecture was really helpful for me just because I had all these ideas kind of swimming around, but they weren't necessarily like solidified. And I had to like go and read physics books, and I had to go and read perspective books. And in preparing for, to talk in front of a bunch of people, which is like, always incredibly stressful. And so you want to be as prepared as possible. And I wound up like learning tons just from the prep work that I did to talk about water, because I had thought about it a lot, but I hadn't ever had to put it into words.
Yeah. I think, for me, I look at, I'm sure you do as well, look at other people's paintings constantly for inspiration, for knowledge. You can look at like a William Tross Richards and, start to figure out how he deconstructed this and how he retained a certain feeling of movement, his color balance, his value balance. There's so much you can learn. They become sort of like encyclopedias of information that other painters have gathered. And for me, being, in a landlocked area, I don't get to, I've done seascapes for a long time.
Well, your state bird is a seagull.
Yeah, it is, oddly enough, yeah. But I spent a lot of time in Hawaii when I was in high school.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I dated my wife. She was Southern California girl, so I spent a lot of time at the beach, so always had this sort of, at least appreciation for the beauty of it. So I've done seascapes in the past, and became sort of more and more dissatisfied with how believable they were.
That's constant. I still feel that.
Yeah. But where my ability to do it from life is limited, I then go to back to William Tross Richards, and then I'll pull up your Instagram and be like, oh, okay, that's how it folds over. It's like you're creating this. There's just so much knowledge in it to be learned just by seeing how you've interpreted that and defined these really subtle things. And then you talk about it too. You break it down in a really nice way that's makes it immediately accessible for other people to figure out.
The thing that I learned probably from Tross Richards that impacted me most was that they had a show at the National Academy of Design Museum of his work. And I had become friends with the woman who curated the show, who was like the William Tross Richards expert. I'd basically stalked her until she showed me, she was the curator of the American art at the Brooklyn Museum, and she showed me his sketchbooks. And anyway, they had this show, and it's a small gallery, the National Academy Museum, and it was mostly studies, and there were so many of them.
Yeah.
And it was clear to me that from looking at those studies, first of all, they were in all mediums. So he was doing, pencil, watercolor, oil, anything he could get his hands on, he was just using to study. And I think by studying with different materials, he's forced to kind of look at different aspects, the things that those materials are better able to capture. So, if you're working with ink, it's going to be line, and, I don't know, with charcoal, it might be mass, and so if you're thinking about, the waveforms, the structure as a mass drawing, it's going to be more about light, versus as a line drawing, it's going to be maybe more about form. And, that just seeing the abundance of stuff, and they were on it, on cardboard, on canvas, on just anything, and it just saw it's almost like a rabid hunger for understanding, and that was the thing that impacted me most, and it really changed the way, because I had tried to paint the ocean. I'd been around it my whole life, and all of the paintings just. They were always, I was trying to emulate Sorolla, and I just, my paintings were not Sorollas.
Yeah.
And then when I realized what work went into those Tross Richards, I spent, after that, I think 2 years just going to the beach with a sketchbook and a pencil and just doing little diagrams and taking notes on the sides. And I filled a sketchbook with those notes. And then I started going back to painting, and I felt like I understood something.
Yeah.
And it just trying to almost like flay an arm and just look at the, the different heads of the deltoid and, just try and understand what's underneath.
Yeah. I think that I experienced, when I went to the Florence Academy, it was just, I think like it is for most of us, it was just like a slap in the face at one
yeah,
how much I had to learn.
Way. Yeah.
But then it opened a world to me that I wasn't even aware of about how much there was to learn, how much dedication you had to have. There was a pivotal moment where I had to ask myself, do I really want to work this hard in my life? My first answer was no. I don't want to work that hard at anything. And then my insane sports competitive drive kicks in, and I'm like, don't end up in old age thinking I never tried, right? But once I made that decision to just work to at least try as hard as I can, and dedicate my life and just say, this is how I'm going to spend my life now, then it was, the floodgates opened, and you're open to information, and you put so much time in that there's this concentrated progression that happens immediately. And that is, it is a sort of lifelong thing, because there's been these ebbs and flows where I'll go out and do a bunch of like plein air stuff, and there's so much learning every single time, and then I'll go back in the studio and I'll get into commissions, or I'll get into like invented scenes or whatever, and I feel I have this clarity of thought with all the stuff I just did from life, and I feel like those paintings just ooze out, right? They just come out so fluidly. And then if I do that too long, I start to get stuck. I start to like forget what things are supposed to look like. I start to get super self-regurgitative, and just it feels like the wheels aren't oily enough, And I'm saying that because I'm in that place right now. I moved out of my studio in November, and I've been in the spare bedroom shuffling around in my slippers like a retiree, and I need that rejuvenation. I need to go back. I have this desperate feeling to like just go learn something again. Remind yourself, because at some point the invented stuff starts to prove what I don't know more than it proves what I do. And you seem to have a really great balance. As I'm speaking, I realize I'm so much closer to the camera than you, and I already feel self-conscious about being so big.
I set you up.
I'm gonna scoot back just a little bit, just to be
on
the same plane as you, so I don't look like a monster. Anyways, you seem to have created like a really beautiful balance of the study and studio work, and maybe part of that is that you teach at the GCA, and so you have a constant reminder of the importance of working from life, the importance of constant study. You're around students that you get to see the spark come on all the time. Does that help, being teaching regularly?
Yeah.
To remind yourself like, okay, I got to go back to the source.
It does. I think that the seasons help a lot, because I can't be on the beach painting, below, I don't know, really, honestly, I think below mid 40s, it's just like, I can't be out there for 3 hours. Yeah. So, and even like 40s, you have to be like really bundled up. So I don't get out there in the winter much. And so that's my time to be in the studio painting. And then the summer I'm like painting furiously. And honestly, by the end of the summer, I get like a little bit, I've just been like, my eyes don't work so well anymore because there's just too much light getting in, and like I'm ready to be in the studio and to kind of slow down. But the other thing that I've learned is that particularly with the ocean, but I think this is true of any landscape, because the light's constantly changing, and the conditions and the whatever your subject is constantly changing. You have to get away from it or look away from it at some point to make a painting.
Yeah.
And so when you're out there and you're gathering information, you're really like, it's all kind of empirical. You're just taking what's there and just trying to like process raw data. But then when you're trying to make paintings, you're trying to kind of sort through all that and decide what you want to say with it, what you want to do with it. And I think that's a very different, and increasingly for me, I mean, at the point when you're like just learning about, like when I'm just learning about, I don't know, how a wave breaks, or, you know, I just want to look at it over and over and over again. But then once I feel like I have seen it in a lot of different conditions and I understand something about it, I still go back and I'm surprised by what I didn't know. But then I'm like hungry to get into the studio and to be able to just sort of work with those ideas. And particularly, I mean, there are parts of the wave that I've been trying to paint. I understand how I want to paint them, but I haven't been able to do that yet. So there's a lot of learning that I still have to do that takes place with my back turned to the beach, like when I'm in my studio. Yeah. And increasingly with teaching, I'm finding that that's also true of, I mean, if you're painting from life, if you've got a model posing, that model, they might be the best model in the world, but unless they're, you know, you take their blood out and and replace it with cement, like they're moving a lot.
Yeah.
And so then you're deciding, and that's the beauty of working from life, is that you're seeing constant flux and you're putting together something coherent. You're kind of putting together a whole from a bunch of little pieces. Yeah. And it doesn't really matter how you work, whether it's like site size or, you know, comparative measurement, like however it is, you at some point have to turn your back to the model to create a coherent picture. And I think that was something that maybe as I was teaching years ago, I was probably less interested in thinking about or talking about. And increasingly with my work in the studio painting the ocean, I find that, you know, if I'm painting a person, I also want to think in the same way, kind of more structurally. And so the way I talk to students about the model is heavily influenced by painting waves, and it's a very different conversation than it was, I don't know, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think I had a similar path in teaching where it was very structured and regimented based on my lack of experience as an artist. You know, early on, most of my experience being just the study part of it, understanding how to make this look like that, right? I just read an Emil Carlson essay on still life painting where he really champions the study of still life with inanimate objects that you can study and study and study. They don't move. They don't have any of that sort of breathing movement of a model. And there's a lot of value in that just because it sort of slows you down and allows you to kind of get through the clumsiness to find the solutions. But the thing that I kind of evolved into was that the most important thing is design and thinking about why the thing looks like it looks, right? Yeah. It's beyond what does it look like. That's the beginning. You just have to understand what this thing is and what it looks like, and then to really describe it, to push it over the top to sort of that tangible reality. You have to truly understand why it looks like that, so that you can give that final description. And then when you want to take that and turn it into a work of art, you have to have purpose beyond just the what and why. It's what does it mean to me and how do I want to describe it? Because like the way you would describe a wave is completely different still than William Tross Richards. You can't like deny you might have even said this to me. I can't remember. You can't deny your hand, right? Like everyone has their particular hand, and temperament, and their way of interpreting things, and the things that they look. I mean, also it has to look cool to you, right? I want to make this thing and really like how it looks, and that is design. It's not just a one-for-one copy. It's I always tried to tell my students, stay after the model and work on it from memory, because now you're remembering the things that you responded to the most aesthetically. And when you make a painting, you solve relative to the painting, not relative to the resource. Whether you're working from life, whether you're working from photos, whether you're working from sketches, the most important thing is what's happening on the canvas. And the way you should solve problems is relative to what's going on the canvas, not what this other resource is telling you should be, but what your sort of intuition is leading you towards. And it sounds like that's kind of what am I hearing that right? You're kind of thinking a little bit more about design, a little bit more about interpretation?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's that, like, when you're learning how to paint, the technical problems, which never go away, are like insurmountable, and they're all consuming. And so when you're first learning to paint a figure, you're just trying to paint a figure that's not a total humiliation and embarrassment. And you get to a certain point where, like, maybe it's not, the best figure that you've ever seen, but it's not humiliating anymore. Or at least mostly it isn't. I think that probably, I don't know, for some people maybe it goes away, maybe for some people that doesn't exist. But for me, that seems like I'm always kind of a little bit fearful that, like, it just looks like a little kid did it, and, like, just dumb and bad.
Yeah.
But
dumb and bad.
But eventually you start to think about maybe the why, like, why am I painting this, and also, I don't know if you've sold a number of figure paintings and worked with galleries, and you're looking around at the art world and you're seeing that there isn't really much of a place for figure painting. The why becomes like a increasingly pressing question, like, what am I doing this for? And and I think that's a question I'm really stuck on right now.
Yeah.
I think that there's something, I mean, this sounds stupid because, there's that, if you're a hammer, every problem is solved with a nail, and we're painters, and so we feel like painting solves everything. But, like, with my kids, I feel like there's a real, like, just with the pull of screens, there's like this vortex that they're getting sucked into, and I think attention becomes like an increasingly, like, important thing, and it's a battleground, and paintings don't make a whole lot of sense in the world. Like, there's really no good place for them, and the way that most of us look at paintings is on a phone screen, which is not doing justice to there's a tactile quality to oil paint in particular that, like, and the translucency of the paint, like glazing, you don't get any of it on a phone screen. So there's so much that's there that you have to see the painting in person for. And then on top of it, it requires, like, long attention, and kind of, I think books and paintings are similar in that, like, they're very old technology that, like, require you to just quiet everything down and focus on them. And if you're only going to get out what you put in. You're never going to go to a museum and, as most people do now, like, look at all the paintings on your phone as you're taking pictures that you're never going to look at of those paintings. Like, you're never going to get anything from those paintings. Yeah. And if you are walking through a museum open to whatever's there, you can be transformed by it. Yeah. Just the way that, like, if I'm reading a book on the subway, if I can tune everything out, I can be transformed by the experience of reading that book. But I there isn't a great space for it right now. And so I think that we're in this battle for relevance.
Yeah.
And I don't want to think that I have to do something to the paintings to make them more relevant to my kids. I feel like we just have to, I don't know, create the right environment, but it's then the why am I doing this? Like, that's a question that I keep coming back to, and what is the purpose of, I mean, they're also like the opposite of commercial. Like, they just don't, it takes forever to make one. It's not a good product to sell. And those are the ideas that I'm kind of fixated on right now, this kind of anti-commercialism, and also the paintings, like their role in our attention and being rewarded for our attention if we choose to give it to a painting, which is, if I'm painting the ocean and spending a long time paying attention to the ocean, there are a lot of rich people who buy houses on the beach, and they buy it probably for the same reason I paint the ocean. It's like, it's a beautiful, like, it's just beautiful. But if you're not gonna give yourself over to just devoting some attention to it, you're not gonna get anything back.
Right. You're getting into just the surface.
Right. Yeah. And then what's the point?
Yeah. So you hit on two things I want to dive deeper into. One is this feeling I get whenever I come to New York and talk to some artists, which is this sort of defeatist, like worthlessness or dead end. I remember, not really that, but
but I mean,
I remember like talking to people who had interviewed to go to the GCA early on, and it was always the same, like, I think he was trying to talk me out of it. Like, and I thought, this is some crazy Jedi mind trick, this reverse psychology to get you to really, really want it. Jacob's a genius. And then the more I hear these conversations, the more I realize, like, if you don't, the reality is, if you don't need to do this, don't do it. Yeah. It's way too hard. I hear comedians talk about the same thing. Like,
there's so many,
do it. Yeah. Musicians, writers, it's the same sort of path where once you're in it, you're like, if you were going to give advice to somebody, it would be, don't do this. There's so many pitfalls and difficulties, and it's all consuming, like you said, and then in the end, nobody cares. Right. But there's also the other side of that, which I have to like hold on to my young, naive self, which is like really hopeful, and the relevance part of it is a big deal. And I have this young, naive glimmer still as I get older that I hope I never lose, but it's, it fades every now and then. But I think it's true. That sort of like the worthlessness of what we do is a reality. The world does not need art. It doesn't need another technician in our way. It doesn't need more pictures. But there's a beauty in the opposite of that as well, which is, if you give somebody that experience, like you've just dedicated to this thing, there's so much knowledge in your work, there's so much clear dedication, that the technical aspect gives people such if they're open to it, that experience beyond the surface image, that once they experience this thing that otherwise would be worthless, they realize that even though they can live without it, they don't want to live without it, right? And that's where that glimmer of hope comes in for me, is in the relevance, especially today where attention spans are so short, and you have the algorithms feeding us nonsense, and TikTok and Instagram Reels, and they just change every 15 seconds. And I worry, because I've got young kids too that are being raised by technology like that, and I see them not going outside as often to play. I see them getting bored very quickly, I see myself getting bored quickly, right? I mean, it affects me as well. But I think that when we were at the Hudson River School, I had this thought. The difference between plein air landscape and studio landscape and what the two different things offer. I was always a fan of Ivan Shishkin. I was always a fan of Peter Monstead, Thomas Moran, the people who had just like so much information in their paintings. And then, of course, I love Twatman, who really edited down to the bare essentials. So trying to figure out like what kind of paintings do I want to make, I leaned more to the more well-informed. And I think the thought that occurred to me in 2008, I think, was what we're giving people is time. If you're driving behind the freeway, which we drive a lot in the West, just massive expanses of space, and you see this little thing, and maybe I take a photo of it as I drive by. Never has the same impact, but a short study, a quick study, to me always felt like what you're doing is giving the drive-by. You're giving the people the experience if they were walking through the woods where they glance over and see the waterfall and then walk by. When you do a painting like Ivan Shishkin, it's as if you stop in that spot and sit and have a 4-hour picnic. You have an opportunity to experience so much more in that space. And that was the thought that made me think, I want more well-informed paintings. I don't want to necessarily be the impressionist. And it was exactly what you're talking about, is what I'm hoping what my paintings offer people is time. That when they see it, they're not just going to want to walk by, they're going to want to stop in front of it. I read a study a few years ago, I'll probably get the numbers wrong, but they did a study in England where they saw that people, walk in the modern area of the museum were spending less than 3 seconds in front of any particular work, and in the more like maybe the Romantics, Waterhouse, and all of those others, they were spending more than 3 minutes. And I mean, it's still only 3 minutes, but in 3 minutes,
3 minutes in front of a painting is long.
Yeah, if you're really consumed by it, you're consuming a lot of information. And I think that, to me, that's the glimmer of hope in terms of relevance, is that if we give it time, if we give it the dedication we know it needs, then it may not reach a vast audience of millions, but it will have an impact on people that are willing to take the time to appreciate it, right? There's something to consume there. And if you haven't given painting everything that it requires, then even if they did take the time to consume it, it's not giving them much back.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? And so I think what you're doing in your work is everything that you could possibly be doing, so that if someone chooses to stop and feed in front of it, it's a banquet for them to feed on.
Well, I think you have to believe in it in order for anybody else to believe in it. So if you're fully like, and so any ideas I have of why painting is relevant, why it's important, why it's like the most important thing in the world right now, that's all just to keep me painting and engaged, and And I tend to have a pretty defeatist attitude about it, that like, at best I can paint something really big, and, if I'm lucky, somebody who can afford it, because it's expensive to have the time to paint something big. And so if somebody can afford it, I'm lucky if they choose to buy it, but then they're going to see it and kind of nobody else. And, without museums and stuff, which I don't have much hope for. I think the world of people who will appreciate the thing that I am, completely devoted to is absolutely tiny, which is okay. I mean, it's a big world and lots of people are into lots of different things, but I do think that there's something incredibly important about it. I don't expect anybody else to, besides my kids, who I'll like browbeat into seeing it my way. But I don't expect anybody else to necessarily to ever see it that way. But it does keep me engaged. It keeps me motivated. And I do think like you know, I'm pretty, well, it was like, there are all these polls about how like the number one job that kids want when they grow up now, when they're polled, is to be an influencer. And
oh my gosh,
I mean, which
so crazy.
It's not surprising. Like it you know, it probably looks like a pretty good job, but what an influencer is really just an advertiser. They're a salesperson. Right. I mean, that's how you make money. You monetize it by, you know, you're holding your Starbucks cup up to the camera, and Starbucks pays you a little something, and you're going for a helicopter ride, and then all of a sudden all these people want to go for helicopter rides, but you get paid.
Make it look as glamorous as you can.
Right. And I was talking to one of my kids about it, you know, just, again, kind of browbeating, but I was saying, like, what if one of your friends, you know, who's like a good guy, a lot of fun, but also just every time you're together hits you up for $40. Like that friend, like, they're going to have fun with you, but really their interest in you is to get money out of you. And that's what influencers are pretending to be, you know, whatever, to get money. I mean, it's like this weird dystopian, like, commercial world that exists, but it's real. Like it's happening. And I think the anti-commercial, it's not to say it's not commercial. There is some commercial quality to art, but I think David Foster Wallace would talk a lot about this as like people, like, the difference between commerce and art is that, or commercial art and art, is that people who don't love you and don't care about you are just trying to get your money, versus people who, I don't know, love the ocean or love, you know, the sunset, or, you know, love something, and they're trying to share that. And I think that's what artists do. And it's a weird thing, but I actually think that the art world, like, has profited by blurring the line between commerce and art so far that I don't think the mainstream art world, that there's a distinction anymore between people who want your money and people who love something. And I think that that's an important distinction. And that's another thing that just kind of keeps me going and makes me feel like this is important in some way, even if it's, you know, just me alone in a studio and, you know, nobody's ever going to see half of the stuff I do, but, like, it still feels important. And in that sense, it feels relevant, in that it's this, like, it's a backlash against a sort of feature of our society that really bothers me.
Yeah. I try to tell my kids that, you know, to find out what it is that they enjoy, and try to live a life that offers them that opportunity as much as possible. But within that,
case in point.
But within that, you have to realize that even if you are following something that you truly love, the majority of that thing sucks. It's work. It's right. Really hard. You know, like, you start a painting, it's really exciting. The meat of the painting is work, and it's frustration, and it's you know, you got to get up and face this thing and figure it out. And I mean, it's not roofing in the summer, but it's hard. It's
a pretty
taxing.
Cushy gig.
Yeah. If you're a movie star, you got to get up early for press and go on these, you know, live out a suitcase. And, like, there's the glamour side people see to it. Even influencers, like, you see the things that they want you to see that look great. But, like, I heard like Mr. Beast. Have you heard of Mr. Beast? He's like the biggest YouTuber, whatever. But he spends massive amounts of time editing and like all the hard work that goes into that. No matter what it is that you choose, most of it sucks. It's just hard. And if you can accept that and say, but it's the suck that I chose, there's something so much more fulfilling to that than just taking the job that's available and working in a cubicle, because then it's not something you chose. It was just what happened to you. And I think that's important for people to understand, that most of life is going to be hard work, and it's stuff that you don't necessarily want to do. But if you did it on purpose, it's different. You have a different association with that. And I have this idea. I'll run it by you, see what you think. I run it by everybody I can, because I have this theory. And it kind of stemmed from talking to artists, and then being in the gallery world for a while, and realizing, or going to conferences, and realizing, like, our world doesn't seem to be expanding. We're not growing our audience at all. Really, it doesn't feel like. The approach that a lot of galleries have to selling traditional paintings is not this heavy marketing that the contemporary or abstract or whatever world has. It's more like a furniture store where they just wait for you to come in and pick out the couch you like and help you load it, right? They're not telling you about it, why it's important, what it's made out of, who made it, why the artist is important, what they've dedicated to it. It's just like, pick out the thing you like.
Why, you want the Ryan Brown? All right, I'll get it for you. Hang on.
Yeah, and I think if there's not a different tactic to sharing it, then of course the audience isn't growing. And that led me into like 2021. I started filming what I'm hoping to turn into a TV series, because as much as I feel like I try to put as much as I can in my paintings, I don't have any real control over whether an audience finds it or not. I don't feel, and the more I paint, the more I realize, and the more artists I meet, the more I realize that even though I love this, I'm probably a mediocre talent at best. I've met so many people that are innately so much better than me, that it's allowed me to kind of see where my real place is. And it doesn't lessen my dedication to it. It just gives me a sense of what my capabilities are, maybe ultimately. And so one thing I really love to do is to like shine a spotlight on the stuff that I really love, which is the podcast. It's a little bit of that, but I feel like the most ubiquitous platform on the planet is streaming television. And we've seen what the cooking shows have done for the entire culinary world, right? Everyone that's making spatulas to knives to farm-to-table restaurants to whatever have benefited from anything from the wacky Guy Fieri shows to like the more serious Anthony Bourdain shows. But it's brought cooking, it's brought the appreciation of food, it's brought that into the average person's home to the point where maybe people think about it more in a way than they otherwise wouldn't. And there's just nothing that I'm aware of that's trying to expose a larger audience to what it is that we do. And I'm not even saying that I'm the one that should be doing a TV series. I actually I sent a pitch deck to the producer of Survivor, and he said it's a good idea, but it'll hinge on the personality of the host. And I almost didn't do it because I'm like, I'm not that. But I look at it as another art project and just say, like, it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea. I want to do it. I'm going to do it. And I don't know if it'll have any impact. I don't know if it'll get picked up. I'm just dumping a ton of money into it at the moment. But I'm worried, as in the same way that you're talking about, that if we don't expand the audience, it's not going to stay stagnant. It's either going to expand or it's going to shrink. And what we do is you hate to think that you're going to dedicate your entire life to a thing and it's going to sit in a closet forever.
But it might. I think you have to accept that also, and
as a potential reality for sure.
And I think you have to be motivated by your belief in it. And like, I can't control the rest of the world. I certainly can't control the art world. I read, critics in, I don't know, the New Yorker or the Times or New York Magazine, and I just think, well, these people have the opposite beliefs that I do. Like, everything that they think is good, I think is bad. Everything they think is bad, I think is good. Like, I just, like, we don't have a common language. I can't communicate with them. And so I just have to accept that that's the world. There's a lot of problems in the world or things that other people don't seem to have a big problem with that I do. And it's just, I just have to do my thing. And if people are supportive of it, then that's great. And so far there have been enough people that are supportive that I can do it. But actually, on the subject of the TV show, Tony and I, we do suggested donation podcast, and we actually started when one of my kids was really little. His best friend's father is a documentary producer, and so he and I were talking, and I was telling him about art, and that basically I felt like there was a media establishment for the art establishment that I didn't fit into. And I felt like there was this other platform. And I started to tell him a little bit about, how I thought about art, and he got interested. And so he and I started working on, and he had worked with Anthony Bourdain. And so he was, we wound up coming up with a TV show idea for, and pitched it to Bourdain's production company. I mean, it was back when he was alive. And they were like, yeah, it's a good idea. But right now, and this is, again, a long time ago, they said the only way that we could sell this to, to somebody to air it or to stream it is if it's a competition with stakes.
Right.
They said that's what you need, and so my friend was like, "Do you want to change the pitch and turn it into that?" I was like, "Hell no, no. That just sounds stupid, and it defeats the whole what I wanted is a platform."
It's totally
and so
not
then,
the point.
At the time, podcasting was fairly new, and I was listening to these. I mean, I don't listen to him much anymore, but I used to listen to Joe Rogan a lot, and he had these long free-form conversations with comedians, and the parallels were so striking to me that the way they talked about working, on a joke and perfecting it, and each word is and it sounded like brushstrokes. It sounded like painting. And so then Tony and I started doing the podcast, and the idea for me was to have conversations with artists, but also with chefs, because there were all there's energy behind cooking shows. And I also felt, I've worked in a professional kitchen just for fun, just to learn. And I love cooking. I'm sure, living in Italy, you can't not fall in love with it. And so we started talking to chefs and realizing that the thing that we do, the craft that we devote our lives to, it's no different from a chef. It's no different from, I don't know, a musician. It's like music in some ways is the best analog, because it's it's not, there aren't words. It's just, you're moved to feel something through sound. Yeah. And that, to me, that's what painting is. Yeah. It's the visual music, and particularly waves feels that way to me. But that's why we did the podcast. It was we weren't going to turn the TV show into a competition. And so it just seemed okay, well, we can do this. We can buy a couple mics and build an audience, and at least have a platform for the thing that we love that, they're not going to write about in New York Magazine. Right.
Well, I've heard, Joe Rogan's talked. I listen to him quite a bit still, and a lot of comedians are coming on. And you okay? You want to switch seats?
No.
Okay. I agree. It's a similar parallel they talk about. But what they've been talking about recently is using YouTube as this platform, this free platform. A lot of comedians are recording their own specials and just putting it up for free. And then the viewership and maybe the subscribers or whatever then gets them kind of recoup their upfront cost. But what it does is it organically builds an audience. And the message basically is, once you have an audience, then the larger platforms can't ignore you, right? Like to have an executive sign off on a TV show, they really have to see the vision of it, and they don't necessarily always do that.
But, well, they're so risk averse. I mean, that's right. I worked in TV before I started painting, and it's incredibly frustrating because if you come up with an idea that's kind of derivative of something that's big, they're really interested.
Yeah.
And if you come up with a new idea, they're kind of like, well, we don't know what to do with this. I don't know if we can sell this. Right? Yeah. And they're just protecting their jobs. They're not interested in taking a risk. And that's why, I mean, TV mostly is pretty horrible. Like it's just unwatchable.
Yeah. And the success that a lot of these comedians are having on their own, for one, it takes more work on their part, right? They have to like be a lot more proactive in recording their own stuff and cutting it down to like shorts that they can put on their social media or whatever. It's a lot of work to do that sort of self-promotion. But when they find an audience, then the TV places can be like, oh, people do like this. There is a response here. So the risk lowers, right? Now we know if we invest in this, there's this many people.
Right. If we've got 1 million people already following you on YouTube, then maybe if we invest in a show, we got 1 million viewers. We'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't see anything like, so far. I mean, it's all, for me, I'm taking on the risk and I'll do it because I think, again, it's just another big painting idea that I'm just going to like go for and see what happens. And if nothing else, maybe throw it up on YouTube and try to organically build an audience. There's certainly different outlets I can try to build that audience with. But I think that I'm hopeful. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I just think like, you know, I am in my own world. I understand I'm in my own world, and I put an importance on this and a weight on this that doesn't necessarily mean anybody else has to care about it. But just having traveled a lot and spent so much time with artists and hearing how eloquent they are, how well studied they are, how dedicated they are, and then the visuals, just like seeing the cool stuff that they're doing. I can't, you know, I grew up watching like woodworking shows on PBS. I grew up watching like Bob Ross, of course. I grew up watching like nature shows that were beautifully shot. I just have always appreciated like the cool shit people can do, you know. And I think there's an innate reality that we all appreciate human achievement, right? We love watching the Olympics. We love sports. We love whatever. Even if you never played football, you love watching football or basketball or whatever, because it's like you can't believe people can do that. And I think that's what gives me hope in finding an audience for this, is when people see it, there's I mean, if you go to the MoMA or whatever, the common response is for the general audience is, my kid could do that, right? There's an immediate recognition of the lack of achievement in a lot of ways. I'm not saying that everything has that. I'm interested in a lot of contemporary art, but to a large degree, that's the response. But when people see what you do or what others like you do, there is an immediate recognition that that's something different, that I couldn't do that person definitely has dedicated. People just know it.
Right. I mean, but, you know, if you look at like figurative art now, there is a lot of stuff that I think is really phenomenal and is like both I can't do it and I would want to do it. But then there's also a lot of stuff that I look at and think, I can't do it, and I wouldn't want to do it, and I'm not that interested in it. And I would say that like this gets to the sense of maybe like taste or you know, design, what you were saying before, like and I think to some extent I feel like I have maybe more in common with some of that like abstract work at MoMA than I do with a lot of people who, you know, somebody who's looking at my paintings and somebody else's paintings might be like, you guys are doing the same thing. And
yeah,
I you know, I look around at a lot of it, and I just, it doesn't have that thing that, you know, makes the, I don't know, Rothko's like compelling. And I don't, you know, and that taste is I mean, that's a really tricky thing to talk about or
Sure.
even to think about, because like, I don't even know how to describe it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, everybody likes their own you know, the authors they gravitate towards, or musicians, or, you know, I could talk about how I think Conor Oberst is the greatest songwriter since Bob Dylan, and that doesn't mean anything, right? Because it's taste.
Right.
He is, though. Undeniable. Yeah, that's a difficult thing. But I think that when I think about expanding the audience, I think about you have people that are going to educate themselves in a particular way. You have that are going to really want to know more about the art, how it was made. They're going to want to know more about the artists themselves, what their journey was. Those are the collectors. Those are the connoisseurs. And then you have the people that just, you know, are working with a designer and need something to match the couch. You have people that, you know, don't know anything about it. They just respond to like the really base essence of beauty. And so there's a wide range, but I just think if I could possibly, I guess for me, I'm starting to kind of lean into the meaning of what I'm doing as an artist, and understanding that like I do want to make more meaningful work, more purposeful work. And I have been in this for a long time. The initial aspect, or I'm sorry, the initial part of my career was just trying to figure out how to do it better. Then that transitioned into feeling a responsibility to monetize it, right? I'm still kind of stuck. I've taken that responsibility on. I'm the breadwinner of the family. So if I'm standing in front of the easel, I feel compelled to do something responsible. And so I have to pay attention to what's sold. I have to pay attention to the audience response. I can't just paint whatever I want. I'm certainly shackled to the market of what I do. I'd love to get to a point where I can release those shackles and see what it is that truly is the most meaningful to me. That's the transition I'm trying to do with my own work. It's very difficult, but I'm trying to prioritize that. But the other thing that I feel like I'm passionate about beyond painting is other people's paintings.
Right.
And I think, can I make it another priority to do my part to expand the audience for other people? Because as much as I love what I do, I love what you do more. You know, I think that I'm such a huge fan of what other artists are doing and their vision, and I'm constantly and just so excited to hear their different thoughts and what they put into their painting and their motivations, why they do what they do. I'm finding that I don't know if it's an equal passion to make paintings and share paintings. I don't necessarily want to become a dealer. I just maybe I want to be a cheerleader. That's what that's my
Get you
my
some
other
pom-poms.
calling. Yeah. I think, you know, it's important enough to me, and I'm a big enough fan that I'm finding that to be a growing motivation to share it.
Yeah, I feel
with
that
other people.
too. I mean, I definitely like that's a motivation for podcasting and for talking to other artists, is just getting to talk to artists.
Yeah.
It's like, that's great. But I would say that just going back to the marketing, like the having to earn money, like, part of me thinks like anything commercial like screws up the purity of art, but then I don't know that I can entirely commit myself to that opinion, because I think there's always a conversation between you and whoever's looking at your paintings. And I suppose like Van Gogh is like this ideal of like purity, that he sold 2 paintings in his life, and so he was just doing what he was doing. But that's not true at all. Like, he was desperate to get an audience, and he was he's painting with Gauguin and seeing Gauguin selling, and he's like, all of his paintings are heavily influenced by Gauguin, and then he's like, I think that there's always a conversation with an audience, whether it's a real audience or it's just your idea of who's looking at your paintings, or it's the responses you're getting on Instagram or whatever, like that's actually important. Like, if I was to close myself off, I think my work would become incoherent. I think that it needs to depend on an audience. And I think sometimes selling work is like, if somebody's willing to spend their money on your paintings, and particularly like, I had a commission years ago by a family that really didn't have much money, and like, they really like saved to buy a painting, and it was so meaningful to me that like, make the car last longer, like, we won't have enough, as much money around, but we really value this thing you're doing. And it like, that's so meaningful. And then the response that like, if you, I don't know, do a gallery show and you do 15 paintings and you sell 10 of them, why did those 5 not sell? And why did the 10? And I used to work with John Pence Gallery in San Francisco. He kind of retired from the gallery, but he was such a great person to work with. He would, I did a number of solo shows with him, and at the beginning of the show, right before the opening, he would walk around with you, and he'd stand in front of each painting, and he'd talk to you about the painting, and he would talk to me about my paintings from a perspective that I had never considered before, which is like, okay, why is somebody gonna like want to walk home with this painting under their arm? Like, why? Like, what is that brushstroke there? Like, what are you doing? Sometimes you just try and get like crazy with the brushstrokes. And he's like, what are you doing there? Like, what's the point? What does that do for the painting? And it started to, because at the time, particularly, I think my very first solo show was with him, and I was very caught up in just like technically making paintings that I hoped would be dazzling.
Sure.
But they weren't. Like, he was, I think, the first time where I really like opened my eyes to the idea that this is a statement. It's like a visual essay that's gonna be in somebody's home if you're lucky. And what are you trying to say with it? Like, what is this thing, and why should somebody care? Yeah,
I think I have a gallery that always says to me, I'll take anything you want to paint, and we'll hang it, we'll show it, and we'll let the audience decide. And I really appreciate that. I've had a good experience with most of my galleries in that way, that they're willing to allow me that freedom to kind of pursue whatever I want. The more I think about it, the more I struggle with that idea. From the one sense, we are visual communicators. So having feedback and understanding whether or not our message is coming through clearly, or maybe what's not allowing it to come through clearly, or what finds an audience versus what doesn't, is really important feedback to get. The thing I struggle with is allowing the audience to govern what I paint. Right. Saying, well, I sold 6 sunsets, but the snow scene didn't work. but I really love that snow scene, right? So I think,
try painting a snow scene at sunset.
At sunset, right? So the balance is like doing things and trying to expand and trying to experiment and saying I really want to explore this thing. It's the same risk aversion that maybe the TV execs have, where I haven't really found an audience for this yet, but I still believe in it. Being willing to do that while at the same time having to again be responsible, like for the family and if they eat or not. It's a very difficult balance, and the marketability of what I do has absolutely had an effect on what I paint. And the audience response has certainly had an effect out of necessity. And I don't know what life would look like if I didn't have that constant pressure. I do think it's made me a better communicator. I think it's given me, like you said, that perspective of the fact that this is for public consumption, and what exactly am I trying to say to an audience other than look how well I painted this. But I think at this point, the biggest struggle is not allowing it to govern me too much, not giving it too much power.
Yeah, there's a balance there for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's important for it to be like a conversation and not like a pontification.
Yeah.
Pontific, whatever.
I think that's right.
That thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I definitely feedback matters a lot.
Yeah.
I definitely on like posting on like online, I pretty much only post ocean paintings, and I do a lot of ocean paintings, but I also paint a lot of people, but I don't post those because I lose followers if I post those. Like the algorithm just, I guess, whatever, it just, if I promote the podcast, I lose followers. Like
really?
There are just certain things that like the algorithm kind of pigeonholes you, and
sure.
and I can imagine that the market, like sales, could sort of exert a similar pressure that you would definitely want to resist.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's the damn algorithm. It's crazy because I feel like I put so much into, say, my figures in the landscape. It is kind of like where my passion really is. But same thing, I could get 4,000 or 5,000 likes on a landscape, and maybe 32 figure in the landscape that took 10 times as long.
It's so fickle. But the other thing is, and here's the thing, like I certainly like I have to take breaks from it. I have to not look at it for a couple weeks at a time because there's just too much going on with it that I don't think is good for us.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of artists who have like made names for themselves on Instagram, and that's great.
Yeah.
But then if they start painting for the algorithm,
right.
Like if you're painting what you know that the algorithm is going to give you rewards for, if you're in your studio and you're working to the algorithm, then you're painting for a computer for essentially for Hal.
Yeah.
Like you're painting for a computer.
Yeah. And
a computer, like you talk about like AI generated art, but you're a human generating art for AI.
Yeah.
That's what it's. I mean, it's like a really twisted little dystopic thing that's actually happening in real time that we're seeing.
Yeah, and it also there's a number of things that artists do that affect how they spend their time or what they create. Patreon has had a thing where I think a lot of people are doing well with Patreon, but it requires so much effort and content development. You to a large degree trade in the art making for content creation. That's something I've struggled with. And I think that it all comes down to like the monetization, the ability to continue doing what you're doing. obviously, like in the academies, there's that dirtiness that we feel that takes the purity away from the actual art when you combine it with money and marketing and blah blah blah, which made me incredibly averse to any of that in the beginning, and inevitably it becomes a necessity. But again, it goes back to balance, and I know there's artists that, like, they want to be popular and they want to be well off, right? And if that's sincerely what you want, I don't even have a problem with that. As long as you're true to the thing that really motivates you, great. You accomplish it, so that's a win.
I mean, if it's working for you, good for you. But it's also, I mean, just thinking about what it actually is, it's, and it, like, not to pass judgment on it, because I certainly, like, I've sold my fair share of paintings just through Instagram, and that's, I mean, I'm grateful for that. And I think a lot of people see my paintings on their phone screens, which is not ideally how I'd have them see them, but it's better than them, they're seeing my paintings and they're moved enough to, reach out to me and that's all great. And I don't mean to disparage people who are making their careers through Instagram, because it's like you said, with, I'm not allowed to interview students for the GCA anymore, because I was talking completely just like, I had like a really good record of talking people out of coming. It was like too good. But I think if you can make it work for yourself in any way, that's great, because you get to do what you love. And if you can love doing what you're doing, that's, I mean, it beats anything. It's the best. But I'm aware that, like, we are being controlled increasingly by a algorithm that is designed basically for commercial purposes, going back to, influencers. Like, when I first got on Instagram, there were no ads, and it was chronological, and you were only showed the stuff you followed. And so if you posted at 9 a.m. and I check at 9:05, your thing is the first at the top, and I get to see that. That's not how it works at all.
Right.
And they're not happy with the way it is, but like anybody that's able to make it work for them, I think it's useful. And Patreon, I mean, I think a lot of people are able to, teach people who are, like, it's expensive to live in New York. If you want to come here and study at the GCA, like, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
And I certainly would never recommend anybody borrow money to study art, because you're not going to be able to pay it back. But I think if you can teach on Patreon and reach people in places where they can actually afford to live and not, like, spend an arm and a leg studying, that's fantastic. It's like, there are all these incredible possibilities. I don't want to sound like a Luddite, angry old man, but I think I think about what these things actually are constantly, and I'm just, like, shocked by them.
I think, when I would talk to students initially, even from the very first time meeting them, I think one of the really most important messages I could potentially share is you have to be really honest with yourself about what it is that you want to do, and then you have to set really hard priorities about how you're going to do that, because you have to adjust your life to whatever it is truly your priority, and it's going to require a complete shift of what you know at the moment. And I think a lot of people are in positions where, maybe they have kids or whatever, they out of necessity have to prioritize the monetization of what they do. But even in that situation, if your priority is is that purity of art and the study and understanding and, you know, making the best work you can. And maybe your paintings take 4 or 5 months to make just because of where you're at, or the difficulties you may have, whatever obstacles you might have. That's your reality. You can't deny that completely and just start doing 3-hour paintings, those paintings a day, and trying to hit the algorithms and whatever, because now you're not doing what it is that you really want to do.
Right.
So everything comes down to a balance and not giving one thing too much power over another. Understanding your realities, understanding your responsibilities and all of your obstacles in your way, and then just trying to navigate them. And if you're not clear about what your priorities are, a lot of different things can start to govern your decision making. And then you end up 10 years down the road thinking, like, what the hell am I doing?
Which is why you were trying to avoid. That's why you got into this gig in the first place. That's what I was looking to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And I love the idea that you shared about painting for the algorithm, and that new thing in our world today that is so scary. Our connection to technology and its subtle influence. Well, it used to be subtle. Now it's an overt influence over the way we think, over the way. I mean, it's politically just killed our ability to communicate. It's lowered our attention span. It's had so many societal impacts, individual impacts on the way we think and consume, and it certainly has a certain power over its influence over maybe what we want to buy or whatever, which is its whole purpose. And so I guess the message is don't give that power over too much to artificial things.
Well, I mean, they're designed to make us more insecure and, you know, make us feel like we can buy our way out of our like deep sadness that like I think is part of being alive. Yeah. And you know, it's those things they're actually transforming us. Yeah. And that, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very weird world, and now you have AI and ChatGPT, and there's a lot of benefits to it, but I think in a lot of ways it's making us dumber. It's not giving us those moments of pause to think, to consider, to deeply think about things. I see my kids on their devices, and like they're watching. I mean, the dumbest thing that's happening that I never could have guessed is watching my son watch other people play video games.
Yeah, that's been going on for a while. Yeah, but
it drives me insane to think like how much of your precious life you're wasting watching the Kardashians.
Think, you know, we were all
everything
wasting
is just
plenty of
watching
time.
Other people live their life. You're not living right now. You're watching other people live.
But that's what TV was when we were kids, and people said that like the attention spans, like MTV was killing attention spans, and before that sitcoms were, and you know, maybe some of it is true. I don't think we're less smart than we were before these technologies, you know, came along. The thing about them is that, like, and I find this with myself, my wife, and I, and our relationships to our phones, and then our kids' relationships to devices, is that, like, if we can't stop ourselves from looking at the dinner table, then they're not going to be able to. So we definitely make an effort to not. But, like, you really have to make an effort to not look at it because it's just so, like, there's so much there to look at. Yeah. And what's gone then is just quiet. Like, if I'm on the subway, hardly anybody is gotten, like, either you're reading, which is pretty old technology, you've got earbuds in and you're listening to something, or a lot of people are like watching, like just full on watching movies or playing video games on their phones, but nobody is just sitting there thinking. And commuting used to be time where you would think. Right. This is pretty crude, but I remember this from being a really little kid. going into like a bathroom stall. That was scrawled in the thing. It said, some people come here to sit and think. I come here to shit and stink. And I don't know why that stayed with me, but it's like being in the bathroom, like just sitting down in the like, that was time that you didn't like, maybe you brought a magazine in there, but like for the most part, that was just time where you would think, and nobody doesn't have their phone in there. And probably a lot of people are going to wind up with hemorrhoids as a result, but the like that time you would think would be just like, that's time to think. And it isn't. And it like, there's something that's getting your attention, and it might not be, it's not necessarily all bad, but I think that the quiet is something that we're missing. And I this is exactly why I think that the kind of painting we're doing is so relevant. And then the other thing is the algorithms, they're so big, and they're like, it's the idea that you sit here and take a white canvas and put one brush stroke down at a time and create something that's completely covered over that white canvas. And it's like somebody looking at it. And this is why I love painting from my imagination, the waves, is because somebody looking at it is entering into a space that completely came out of my mind. It's from nowhere but my, like, just in my head. And so they're entering this space. It's like a dream space. And it's quiet, and it's just, if you can give yourself time to take it in, I think it's like it allows for that kind of quiet, just thinking. And I think that that's the thing. I mean, with all of the technology, that's the thing that I find we really like. We need some counterbalance to most, is just to find time to simply think, to process, because I think historically, just in human history, probably most people have gone through life never thinking about what they're never really confronting existential questions about. And I think I don't know whether it's better or worse to confront those questions, because there aren't any answers. But I sure think that, like, I think my father probably never confronted any questions about why, or, he just did. And there's something sad about that to me.
I think it certainly, that those contemplative moments allow, I think, maybe for more meaning, because you consider that why, and you start to maybe dive a little bit deeper into the experiences that you're having. Instead of it happening to you, you're aware that it's happening. And maybe you can exert a little bit of control over what's happening.
Well, you're choosing then. Which is, I mean, that's.
There's I used to, my grandpa left me his Louis L'Amour books when he died, and so he had every single one of them, and I love Louis L'Amour. But there's a book in there that talks about, moving west and these pioneers, and how they would only bring the best books, because it was a luxury to have any sort of books or something to read or whatever. And it talks about how leisure was such a hard-won time, that it was so precious, because it was so hard to get, and it was so rare that the majority of their life was spent on finding the daily subsistence, and the preciousness of the leisure was then spent on the best things, in quiet moments, contemplating, reading the best books.
That's the thinker, right? The Rodin sculpture. I mean, that's what it is.
And now we're in a time where leisure is so abundant that we waste it on watching other people play video games. We can't even be bothered to pick up the controller and play ourselves. But I think there's that pendulum swing where, because because so much of our leisure is wasted on mindless things, like maybe the only time we get to contemplate now is in the shower, but that'll change. We're going to get TVs in the shower at some point.
Or waterproof phones.
Yeah, we've lost the toilet now. We're about to lose the shower.
That fight.
But I think I do find that when I'm in the shower, I have so many ideas, right? It is like one of those times I think that you forget, like on the toilet, falling asleep, how do most people fall asleep now? You're on your phone and then you finally put it down. Those moments to contemplate, because we're losing them, because we're not even necessarily fully aware that it's sliding away, but when you're reminded, and maybe that's the difficulty, because you and I are still a generation that grew up without cell phones. We grew up without the internet. So we know what it's like. So it's easier for us to be reminded when our phones are down. This is how it used to be.
Right.
And this is the benefit of putting the phone down. It may be more difficult for the current generation to understand that, but the hope is that when they do experience those contemplative moments, they'll understand that that's something different and that's precious, and maybe they start to value it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, my kids definitely, they'll take, having fun with their friends and, walking around and, I don't know, doing whatever the hell they do, but they'll take that over looking at their phones any time.
Yeah.
But it's the idle time that you would be just thinking that's getting eaten away that I feel like is important, and that's the thing that I, want to help them kind of reclaim in some way. I mean, not entirely. Like, you should also probably zone out sometime too.
Yeah.
Like, there's a place for that. And I think, it's easy. I mean, my parents' generation was not really, they didn't grow up with TVs in their homes. And so they're looking at me watching TV the same way that I'm looking at my kids on the phones. And, as far as I can tell, TV didn't totally break me. Maybe it did, and I'm just not aware. But I think, the phones, I mean, they'll survive that too. And, but it is, I think it's worth noticing how it's changing us, and, if it's changing us in ways or taking time from away from things that we want to value. I think then we need to choose to stand up for those things and to at least reclaim some space for those. And I think painting exists, or has the potential to exist in a very important place in whatever the world becomes, because it is that quiet space, just the way that, I don't know, over when COVID shut everything down, I somehow wound up with a lot of time to read. Mm-hmm. And I've just been reading ferociously ever since. And it's been fantastic. It's been, I used to read, I probably stopped for a long time, just read New Yorker articles or something. But getting back into long, heavy books, 1,000-page books, that's, you go deep into this world, and it's a long meditative journey that I think you can get also from painting. Maybe not 1,000-page 6-month commitment, but looking at paintings, it's the same thing.
Yeah, but it's maybe even longer than that, because when you do live with original art, you don't sit down and consume it for 4 hours, every day for 3 months until it's finished. But you consume it every day. Yeah. And so the accumulated time of the influence of that work on you is huge.
Yeah.
I've been lucky enough to kind of collect slowly over time. Got a little head study you did. I've got a couple of Travis's. I've got Katie Whipple, and it's growing, and I hope to continue that because I want to live in a museum.
That's a Ramiro etching.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Is that Jordan? No.
No,
That's you. Okay. Yeah, I mean, even having your own art around, like I don't really, the monetization of my work is the least favorite thing of what I do, and I'd love to never have to sell again. I don't play the lottery, but I that's the idea. Is like, how do I come into my wife will probably divorce me, and my next one I'll have
you'll marry rich.
I'm gonna marry rich. Yeah, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I think I'd love to just constantly surround myself with that because again, it's a daily consumption thing. You walk by it, you may not, give it a glance, but it's just the feeling of it and knowing, especially with friends, getting to know the artists has made me appreciate the work even more, because then it comes with a relationship on top of that. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the hope is just more and more people learn to appreciate that in their life.
Just make space for it.
Yeah,
I think, and ideally, it'd be nice if there were institutions that made space for it.
Yeah.
That were interested in contemporary painting that like slows down time for people a little bit. Like,
yeah, and for me, I do feel like it's a narrative that museums are subject to public opinion to a degree, and like anything else, right? They have to answer to certain authorities, and I think that, like, I remember talking to Travis, and he said I was sharing this idea of a small pendulum swing back to an appreciation of representation, and he said something about I think it may have been like Sylvester Stallone bought a Bouguereau painting of
the Pietà.
The Pietà, yeah.
And then Michael Jackson bought it, I think.
Yeah, but he said that he brought it home, and all of his friends came over and made fun of him for this painting, and so he ended up selling it. And I don't know, maybe Michael Jackson, Mel Gibson.
I got dumped the Bouguereau. It's no good.
Yeah.
Adrian, get rid of it.
I think maybe he said that he wanted to like return to the gallery because they lied to him or whatever. I can't remember exactly, but I thought my response to that is, but the friends only came over and made fun of it because of the narrative that they've been fed about what makes art good and what good art is. And if you could just alter the narrative a little bit and not even say, modernism, contemporary, whatever you want to call it, abstract is lesser, but just say, amplify the volume on the voice of this kind of thing, where all you're doing is turning up the brightness on the light, shining on the art that we love, that right now feels a little bit dim, bringing more awareness to it, and just slowly changing the narrative so that if you did then see a Bouguereau, you wouldn't have been fed this thing that it's kitschy or overly sentimental or whatever. You would be hearing a voice that says sentimentality is actually okay. There's a place for this, and I think that again, the intrinsic relationship we have to anything done this well is a recognition of how amazing it is that somebody made that. So I don't think it's a hard sell to bring relevance back to it. I just think it requires a little bit more amplification of the narrative that it is relevant and important, and it's just fucking cool. It's just so amazing to see.
Sentimental is the word, like, sentiment is important, right? Like, art without sentiment wouldn't be, I don't think, all that interesting. But then if it gets like overly sentimental, it's like it becomes saccharine, which is fake sugar, which is like falsely, it's pretending to be sincere, but it isn't really sincere. And I think the 19th century, probably you could say that they were like mass producing the way industrialization mass produced a lot of things. the academies were mass producing art, and I think a lot of bad art got made along with the good art. And so then you have to sort through, and this comes back to taste. Like, you know, I don't know who's qualified to say, you know, which Bouguereaus are sincere versus which ones he was shipping to America and never thought he'd see again, which ones were painted by his workshop, and which one, like the Pietà, I think, if memory serves, was painted after he lost one of his children, like a baby. And I think it's full of feeling because he had experienced, I mean, that's the most pain you'll ever feel. And he was going through it, and he, you know, painted his way through that difficult time. And there's, you know, something of that pain in that painting. And that's, I think, maybe what would make that one, you know, different than some of the others, or make it more, you know,
have lasting relevance.
Right. But, yeah, I mean,
well, I just maintain that if a large audience can be convinced that Drake is making music, then and he can.
I don't know enough about Drake to know.
Nor should you. Nobody should. It's the worst. But if we can be convinced that bad music is good, we can be convinced that good painting is good. That's my contention.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, well, I don't want to keep you too long. I appreciate you letting me come and
thanks for coming
share
and
your space.
for chatting. It's always fun. I mean, this is the main reason to do a podcast. It's just to get to like talk art. I just feel like you know, with kids and you know, I don't know. There's so much practicality that you know, having conversations that are impractical becomes really important, and about impractical things that you know, maybe people care about, but nobody should ever feel like it's there if you want it.
Yeah. Well, we should tell people, you know, I think anyone looking at studying or you know, wanting to pursue this, don't do it. But if you have to, the GCA has minds like this.
I will definitely try to talk you out of it if you talk to me first. But my feeling was always, if I can talk somebody out of it, I've done them a favor.
Right.
If I can say absolutely everything that, you know, how bad it's going to life is going to be for you, and you still want to pursue this, then you're the right person.
Then you just bought into the club.
And you're if it means, you know, renting out a closet, living in there, and eating rice and beans for the rest of your life, you're painting, and that's what makes you happy. And nobody ever cares about it, looks at it, or sees it, but you're doing the thing you love. Then you're the right person. If you're not that person, don't come to study art.
But if you are that person,
I think Grand Central Academy, P.O. Box.
But I think that's really, truly one of the benefits of studying here, beyond, you know, being able to be exposed to New York and the, you know, massive amount of things there are to do here and see.
We have good pizza. That's about it.
Pizza and the museums are amazing, and there's a lot of benefit. But I do think one of the benefits, the main benefit, is the community that you guys have built there. I do think it's, in my experience, it's so much more of a family environment. There's like a really, every time I've gone there, I just feel this deep love and appreciation between students, teachers, that I've always appreciated. And everyone cares so much about what they're doing. That kind of environment, as I was running my school in Utah, I was so distinctly aware that I wasn't giving the students that. Because we didn't have enough students, or we didn't have various teachers, and so I felt to some degree like I was cheating them out of that. I was kind of helping them learn how to draw and paint a little bit better from a technical standpoint, but I was really aware of the community that they were missing. So some of my students ended up at the GCA, some have ended up at Lime Academy now, and I just visited a couple days ago up at Lyme, and it's just so thrilling to see them have that larger community and experience with more teachers, and the brilliant minds that are involved with those schools is really so much a part of a student's development. So,
yeah, it's such a I mean, I remember back to meeting, Travis Schlott, Kate Lehman, Sarah Lamb and Tony Cernai, and I met in a train tunnel doing graffiti and found out that we were both into classical art, and we've been friends ever since. And you just, when you meet your community of people who love this thing that's so obscure, it's hard to find, it's not interesting to almost everybody, but you find this tiny group of people who love it as much as you do, and you just want to spend every second with those people, and that you see that happening in those communities, and it's I love seeing that. And then those students who you're working with get out in the world and do things that you never could have imagined. They're inspiring you, and they're your peers and your friends, and these are people who you were teaching 10 years ago, and now they're you're learning more from them than you could have ever given to them. And on top of it, they're your good friends now. They're people you want to spend time with.
Yeah, it's amazing. So anyone thinking about it, jump in, man. It as hard as it might be, it's super rewarding. So where on Instagram they can find you, Edward Minoff.
Yeah,
that's your handle. Edward
Minoff on Instagram, and that's pretty. I mean, I have a website that I started to build, and then I want to, because everything I have to do it myself. I can't. So then I start to build a website. It's not it's put something up for as a placeholder, and I'll get it. I'll do it, but I never did it. So it's one of these days maybe I'll put up a proper website. I have just 4 paintings on a.
But then you have the podcast, Suggested Donations, which has been going on for a number of years, and you've interviewed a ton of people and it's really good, super entertaining. I've listened to every single episode, and they can find that pretty well anywhere, right? Spotify, Apple,
Apple. I think we're on Google Play now, but Spotify was, I think, newish, and we're there.
Yeah, so I think it's important, go back to all of the previous interviews if you're just finding it, because when did you start that? What year?
I don't even want to think about it. It was a long time ago, yeah.
But I mean, they're archived, and there's a lot of great conversations. I've listened to it when I'm painting, and the ideas it sparks and the inspiration I get from it, just hearing, it's a glimpse into people's minds and how they think. So
we tend to focus on the bad. You always focus on criticisms, so when people criticize the podcast, we're always we're doing this for free. Just don't listen. Yeah. But we also get a lot, people I'm painting on an island in the Pacific and a studio, and I don't feel like I have any community, but I listen to the podcast, and you guys are creating a community for me. And that that's just the best to hear that. And so it's nice to be able to have these conversations, which is fun for us. But then on the backside of it all, there's also it's able to reach people who just don't have access to this world that that you and I exist in, and that's been really gratifying.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, because I'm doing this now, but it doesn't occur to me that there'll be an audience for it. But I understand what it is to be your audience, to listen to it and to hear you talk to other artists. I feel like I get to know those artists, and then when I meet them in person, I feel like I've already spent time with them, like a celebrity, right? If I met Joe Rogan, I'd be like, I already know you. We're already friends. Or whoever.
You'd be like, security.
But it certainly gives me, or it makes me feel more familiar with a lot of artists that I haven't maybe met in person yet. And so I appreciate it from that standpoint. And then you're teaching at the GCA.
Yeah.
And you're just making paintings.
I'm also teaching at Columbia University.
Okay, what are you teaching there?
I teach cast drawing.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did that meet with any resistance from faculty there?
Yeah, it continues to meet with a lot of resistance, but the students really love it, and it's fairly small. It's limited in like my resources in terms of what I like the space, to have people like to set up casts in a room that's shared with the art department, the film department, and the writing department. Like it's a lot of work to get things to a place where people can work consistently. But the students, the response has been fantastic. And, a number of the students wind up coming over to the GCA at some point. Yeah. But I think a lot of them don't, but I think a lot of them are sort of, the way they see is sort of transformed because I'm able to kind of pass on the stuff that was passed on to me through, Dan and Ramiro, or through Jacob Collins and Michael Grimaldi and, just Dan Thompson, like all the people I've studied with. And I'm just able to share that. And it's eye-opening for so many of these students who are kind of find themselves more in like a contemporary art world. So for me, it's fascinating because I'm the first exposure that a lot of them have to this world that you and I exist in, but that most people in the art world either don't know about or just aren't that interested in. And I think when they realize just how deep you can go in just a drawing of a plaster cast, and how profound that meditation can be, and how it can sort of like ripples in a pond kind of reverberate back at you and change the way that you see the world. Like I think it's really been transformative for a lot of them. Yeah.
I noticed when I went to the Florence Academy the first time, I had an initial resistance to what they were doing. And then it occurred to me what they were really doing, and everything flipped around. But then I made so much progress so quickly, and it was so understandable, so accessible, that I came home, started to teach it at 2 universities. And initially the teachers were sort of intrigued, like, but I had just graduated the same university maybe a year prior, so I was still kind of a young, naive student to these teachers. But I think they were interested somewhat in this new experience. When you teach it, it's so organized and it's so accessible in terms of your ability to understand it and make vast improvements quickly, that of course the students are turned on by it because they see their potential increasing. They understand something that they hadn't understood before. They're developing skills that are obviously improvements, and then slowly the resistance from the faculty built because they didn't know, it was new to them, and they weren't willing to like go back and see what it really was about. They just saw it as different. And so ultimately I was kind of pushed out, but the students are left just starving for it, because in the rest of that education, it's sort of a chaotic jumble of ideas that it's almost impossible for them to put together in a coherent manner that will allow for their progress. And so when they experience something like this, it's just like a light in the dark.
Yeah.
And I was desperate I felt like I'd been given a box of flashlights, and I brought them back, and all I wanted to do was hand them out, and let people find their way a little bit easier. But in a university setting, it can be difficult to convince the establishment as is that it's beneficial.
It's that part is tough. But the students, like, I think when you open the conversation up to just like trying to understand what's around you, and trying to paint from a perspective of just understanding what you're seeing, why you're seeing what you're seeing, and just all the factors that like, and then trying to be able to explain that on a blank sheet of paper or on a canvas, like that people love the students that I've worked with, like even the ones who come in a little skeptical at one moment, and this is really fulfilling for me, like at some point throughout the semester, I see this moment where they just maybe it's momentary and maybe it goes away, like maybe they go back to, but for a moment I see them fall in love with it.
Yeah.
And that moment, I can remember specific students and specific moments where I just would be talking to them and helping them see something or helping them see a different way of seeing something. And all of a sudden they just you just see this like a flash.
Yeah.
And then they're, I don't know if it changes, what they do with, but I've found that they've really everybody has responded to it. Even the people who come in and, really kind of like, well, somebody told me I should do this. I don't know.
Sure. Well, it's the same thing. Like when I was talking to these students that are now studying at Lyme, I said, come back to this phrase, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. And when they were students of mine, I would explain what the environment could be like in a larger academy, why they should look at the GCA or Barcelona or Lyme Academy, because you're going to get this, 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 and this. And that community affects you in this, this, and this way. Conceptually they understood what I was saying. They kind of got the idea. But now that they're there, I can be like, see what I'm talking about? and they're
like, yes.
You have that. It's like they have surgeries now where maybe people can hear for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. And it's that, for me, it was like seeing for the first time. You get that aha moment where you're like, I never saw that before. And when you see for the first time, it's like a superpower. I think inevitably it changes people, and it may not be the all-determining factor in what they ultimately end up creating, but it changes you when you have that veil taken away from your eyes, and all of a sudden the world opens up in front of you. And that's what it felt like when you have those first moments of study, and you're giving it to them just by kind of presenting it in an understandable, digestible way that it was presented to you, and you get that good feeling because you know it so deeply.
Right.
You experienced it yourself.
Well, it's even just having a conversation with them. Like to me, that's,
Yeah, Nikki Covington, right?
Yeah.
Studied the GCA for a while. Yeah, I remember I taught him at BYU, and after the first couple classes, we had this 3-hour discussion after class one day, and I could see his eyes just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and from that day on, he was off and running. So just exposure to that information. And it's the cool thing about it is once you have it, it's not yours. It's part of this larger tradition. And so you're desperate to pass it on, not because it's self-aggrandizing or it makes you self-important. It's just because it's so cool and you just want to share it with everybody. It's life-changing.
Well, it was for us.
It was for us.
For better and for worse.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so people can find you, Columbia GCA, on Instagram, on your website, edwardminoff.com.
Yeah.
And then do you teach workshops?
I used to. I haven't, basically since I think I maybe tried one online during COVID and decided I could never teach online. Yeah. And since then I haven't done any.
Yeah.
Travis and I have been talking about putting the old band back together. We used to teach a night class. This is before either one of us taught at the GCA. We taught a night class, Ted and Travis. So it was TNT, or Travis and Ted, and it was this is before either one of us had kids.
It was legendary. I heard about it all the time.
Oh, because Greg Mortensen was in there?
Greg, I've had so many friends go to the GCA and Katie Whipple.
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
I
was always so jealous I couldn't participate.
That was so much fun so it was 3 nights a week, I think. Maybe it was 4 nights a week. But Travis and I would go in every night to teach, and we'd hang out. One of us would teach, the other would just draw or paint. And so we were mostly working, kind of teaching, and then, on the breaks we'd be like having like push-up contests or like stupid things like that.
We did that.
It was so much fun, and it was just so much fun to just be like with a bunch of people who are enthusiastic about this kind of painting, and sharing what we could, or talking about having conversations about it, and then painting more than we're teaching, and it was so much fun.
I did this painting retreat last year in Zion. Travis came to, Sebastian and a bunch of others, and I think that's kind of what I want to do. I don't necessarily want to teach regularly again, at least that's how I feel right now, but I love, like, the Hudson River Fellowship for me was such a life-changing thing. The 2 years I went, and I've always been desperate to like recreate that in experiences, and the Zion thing was kind of my first opportunity to try and have a similar experience, and that's what I'm kind of looking forward to doing in the future. I've talked to another person about maybe renting a chateau in France and doing another thing like that, and so I'm really hopeful I can get you to come to that in the future.
I'd be psyched.
So, I mean, you're on my tiny list of people I really love spending time with. I mean, I love spending time with a lot of people. I mean, in a situation like that, having you around for that, and just the fun we could have. I'm hopeful I can organize more of those in the future. Yeah,
that sounds great. I mean, the Zion thing I talked to Travis before we went, and it sounded great.
Yeah, it was kind of my first time really going for something like that, and I found out it's a lot of work, but it's not so much work that it's insurmountable. It's just busy. It's like emails and blah blah blah. It's not that bad. So
that sounds horrible. It takes me like a year to write an email.
Yeah,
to say no thanks.
It didn't scare me away.
That's good.
So
you're braver than I am.
Yeah, I'm hopeful to do it in the future. It's really, I'm just trying to throw the parties I wish I was invited to. That's what it is. So anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, it's
always
really
fun to
awesome
talk.
to see your space, and I'll get a little bit of B-roll if you don't mind, so I can have that as an outro to the podcast. And thanks again. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
All right, that's it.
Cool.